welcome to the recorded version.
You missed the good stuff.
Yeah, recorded. So thank you, Allison. That's awesome. And so I'm glad we'll all be kind of reading together as we move forward. The one note about the listserv idea that came up at the summit, I think a few people might have had it, but I remember Darla saying it. So thank you, Darla, for that idea. So Eric and I will send out kind of an inaugural listserv and assume that people want to opt out as opposed to opt in. So just look for that to come from one of us in the next few days, maybe early next week. All right, so next we're gonna just do a quick 5-second check-in and let everybody test their mics, use their voice, and maybe we all kind of know each other a little bit, I think, but where you're from, if you went to the summit, those types of things, and just a quick little check-in. So I'm Jody Black. I'm from Fleming College in Peterborough, Ontario, and I was at the summit, and so I'm pleased to see lots of familiar faces. Whoever wants to go next can go for it.
I'm Eric Moore from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I am where I serve as the UDL specialist and accessibility specialist. And along with Jody, I'm one of the co-originators of the SIG. Very glad to be with you guys today and very much enjoyed these conversations we have.
Hi there, I am Darla Benton-Kearney. Can you guys all hear me? Yay! I am from Mohawk College in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I am a UDL curriculum consultant in our Center for Teaching and Learning, and I was at the summit and it was wonderful.
I'm Joanna Hodge. I'm from Fleming College as well, but the Frost campus. I teach geology. I was also at the summit, and I am not any kind of UDL expert. I'm just trying to design my curriculum better. So that's why I'm here.
Hi folks, it's William Myhill. Can you hear me all right? Okay, so I'm physically right now at Onondaga Community College where I work on a grant where I serve as their inclusive education specialist and do UDL training for faculty. And in my other life, I'm at Syracuse University where I do legal research for Disability Institute. And I'm also currently spending part of my time as the university's ADA coordinator. They lost their ADA coordinator who took on a different job and asked me to step in. And so I'm working out of their Equal Opportunity, Inclusion, and Resolution Services office and quite enjoying that work. So that's what I'm up to.
Julie?
Yeah, hi, I'm Julie Maxon from Metropolitan State University in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm a faculty developer. This is my new hat. In my former and continuing life, I'm also a geologist. So our Faculty Development Center has, as one of its most important missions, helping faculty with the idea of teaching for inclusion, and where sometimes that means anti-racism, anti-racist pedagogy. But something that I've brought to the center is a real interest in teaching for accessibility, universal design. So over this year, I've been working with our Accessibility Resources Director on a 4-part faculty development series that culminates in a faculty learning circle, and we'll be launching that in August with folks in the next academic year. I'll also mention that I'm new enough to this group and to the idea of UDL in higher education that I missed the summit, didn't really know it existed, so now it's on my radar. I'll see you next year.
Awesome. And Mackenzie is here as an observer just because of the content that we're going to be talking about, especially as pertains to the needs of our community and for the SIG next year. But Mackenzie, would you like to just introduce yourself?
I would. Thanks, Eric. I am Mackenzie Nicholas. I work with the UDL-IRN and helped to plan the summit, but I really appreciate you guys letting me just join in because we are always trying to improve the summit and make sure things are better next year and the year after that. So I really appreciate you letting me sit in and listen to your reflections. Thanks.
All right, so let's jump in. For those of you who have not been with us in the past, the SIG has basically focused our meetings around thematic topics. So this is our third. The first one started around the conversation around how do you begin the conversation of UDL in higher ed with faculty or staff or administrators who are not familiar with UDL. And that was a fruitful conversation. And the one prior to this was focused on where the research is with UDL and understanding that in the context of higher ed, in many cases, research is important as a selling point to get especially administrators and some faculty willing to buy in. And so trying to understand what's out there right now, where are opportunities. We talked about the potential to be partnering with faculty for action research to both immediately see the effects of UDL in their own context and to start contributing to that research base, that sort of thing. We have the notes from those prior sessions, so if you were not there and want to kind of see what we talked about, please feel free to request that and we can put you in touch with that notes bank. We're currently up to about 80 people who have expressed interest in what we do, though we typically only see about 10, less than 10 people come to these actual meetings. We're trying to figure out why, why there's the disconnect between people who are interested and people who actually show up. We had supposed that it might be due to the time zone issues and so forth, and that's why we're trying this idea of offering this session at 2 different times. But so that's kind of where we are. Regardless, the smaller number of people that we do get here tend to have good conversations that drive us forward and are just very energizing. So on that note, what we wanted to explore today, coming hot off the summit, was to reflect on 1 or 2 things that you learned at the summit that will influence your work this year. I think everybody here was at the summit, right? Was there anybody that was not at the summit? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think
I wasn't there. This is Julie.
Oh, you were not there. Okay. Okay. So Julie, you will at least hopefully benefit from hearing what other people's takeaways were. And if you've had other professional development opportunities that we haven't, you might also be sharing about where you are in your journey if you would like to.
Sure, thanks.
So let's go ahead and start with that. So anybody want to jump in with what was 1 or 2 things that you learned at the summit, takeaways that will influence your work this year?
This is William. I'll jump in. I try not to jump in because I usually jump in too early. But so I don't have my notes with me. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of thinking about this as what I got out of it as being kind of a greater commitment to UDL. I've been working with, maybe dabbling in, and doing various types of UDL work for probably 8 or 9 years. And going to this particular conference and meeting you folks and feeling, in a sense, a part of a community that really is passionate about this and connecting with you was really important for me and reaffirms the work that I'm currently doing with UDL. So it's just, it's not, I'm not saying there aren't other takeaways, but one thing that's important to me is just I've recognized my own commitment to UDL and where and how I look to apply it has really been strengthened.
that's awesome. I felt that too. The building community part, like there was lots of good learning from the content of the sessions as well and from the content of the conversations. But as the week kind of slipped away and I went back to my day-to-day at campus, I did find myself reflecting back and thinking of the energy of some of our conversations around those circles and just the camaraderie, the community of being together in that shared space. That really stood out for me too. And I feel like that put some gas in the tank to for coming, like it's a kind of a well to draw from, and these conversations will be a well to draw from during some of those times when the work, as we know, gets hard. And yeah, but that stood out for me too, William. Anyone else? Like, feel free to jump. We encourage jumping.
This is Allison, and oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think for me, what I really recognized was that the scope is so much bigger than I even really understood. I'm pretty new to UDL, and I have sort of approached it from a curriculum development point of view. I came at it through accessibility and trying to design curriculum that would reduce the need for, multiple accommodations, that kind of thing. And so one of the things that I got from the summit was that it was so much bigger than all of that. And I think I kind of knew that, but hadn't really seen it. One of the talks, Chrissy, which was kind of near and dear to my heart because I am also from New Zealand, but bringing that cultural aspect into it. Julie, the comment that you just made about racism, those are the kinds of things that I hadn't really thought about previously in terms of access and universal design. So it's kind of intimidating and overwhelming and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, this is Allison. I want to appreciate how these comments are all really focused on the why, and often we'll get pushback. I actually heard more pushback at the IRN this year than I have in previous years of, I want to see the research and I want to see the data. And it was, so I do really appreciate, especially from this group, that you're starting with that why.
Definitely.
For those, specifically for Julie or for those who are watching the recording and we're not at the summit, Chrissy's presentation, which Joanna was referring to, Chrissy works in New Zealand, where she works with Aboriginal populations, and she has actually actively converted the UDL guidelines to the context of that culture, going as far as adding checkpoints like how does this material speak to the Maori cultural values? There's a word for that I don't know. that kind of thing. Hey, Lillian.
Hi.
And so that's what we're talking about. And so that also was a major takeaway for me. I loved the idea. Last year particularly, there was pushback that UDL was being presented in a way that was really United States oriented, in a way that was detrimental to our international populations. And so I think it was really important that they went out of their way to make sure that we are representing other cultures in the way we think about UDL. Lillian, so I'm going to drop the notes in the chat again. Unfortunately, the chat doesn't maintain history for people who are coming in. We have just kind of began. We did some housekeeping. We introduced ourselves, and so you can kind of see who all is here once you get to the notes. Lillian, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? You're on mute right now.
There we go.
There you go.
Hi. Sorry, I had a meeting at 8:30. So I am at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina, and I am the UDL coordinator for our university, we have worked with a group called College Star, and we are one of the anchor campuses in North Carolina, along with ECU and Fayetteville State. And so I've been introducing UDL to our faculty, mostly through department meetings and also workshops through our Center for Academic Excellence, which most other places will call a Center for Teaching and Learning. Also trying to present at, been going to Lilly conferences and really appreciate the POD network for faculty development. And hoping to, in the summer, work on getting a podcast going, talking about UDL in post-secondary contexts. So I'm very happy to meet all of you and see what you all are doing.
And I just dropped a link to Pod. I think I put too much content in that link. Let me try that again. Podnetwork.org. Okay, great. So, Julie, Lillian, you were not at the summit, were you?
I was not, so I really wanted to find out what you all were talking about. And I just at the end of a conversation, I would wish I had heard about how America-specific UDL was and getting it into a more international venue or looking at it that way, because I'm really interested in how intercultural competency and UDL come together. We're doing a faculty learning community on intercultural competency. And at the POD meeting last year, I learned about indigenous pedagogies, and especially from University of Alaska, and difficult dialogues, those sorts of things. And also interested in contemplative pedagogy and how those things also relate to UDL. So that international part and the intercultural competency is something I'm very passionate about, but it's a new area of study for me. So I'm not, a long expert on it, but think we can do a lot to learn from multiple, ways of seeing this thing, not just in America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Carla, did you want to share anything?
I do. I keep trying to jump in and then I'm like, no, not yet. Hi, guys. I think for me, there were plenty of takeaways. I don't want to minimize anything that I took away from the conference, like from the summit. There were tons and tons of takeaways. I think for me, one of the biggest ones, I think William and Jody have already touched on, was really the community and the community building and how many of us there are. I think and I don't want to speak for anyone else, but the sense that I'm getting is that we're kind of islands unto ourselves within our institutions. I know for me, I am the only UDL curriculum consultant in my institution, and I suspect that is true for lots of you. I think, Joanna, you're kind of the primary one at your Frost campus, even though you do have the lovely Jody at your other campus. So I think for me, there's more of us than I thought, and that was very comforting. I think the second piece, though, for me was I would like to work more on partnerships with other institutions, because there are very few of us. I was so fortunate to connect with Jody. It was someone from her college who happened to be at a professional development opportunity here at Mohawk. And so he connected the two of us. And I think I need to be doing more of that, because we are, but again, maybe you aren't. I feel like for many of us, we are kind of islands unto ourselves in our institution, but we aren't as a whole. And so I'm going to be looking for more opportunities to do that in the future. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jody and I had kind of had opportunity to debrief the two of us earlier, and we had kind of come up with what we wanted to share with you as far as one of our takeaways. For those of you who weren't there, one of the most powerful whole assembly talks, in my perspective, was from Katie Novak, who's pretty well known in our field as the author of UDL Now and several other texts. and is just a really high energy person, the type of person that just gets other people energized. And she delivered a talk that was exploring the need for action in UDL to move us past what she's calling the chasm between early adopters and then more of a mainstream implementation or integration of UDL and how we go about education around the world. So if you're looking in the notes, I brought in one of the diagrams that she used to illustrate this. And I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share just in case some people don't have access to that. So let's see, are you seeing the notes? Okay, so you've got, there's actually a couple models that are being blended here, and this model was used by Brian Dean and something else, and we were wondering what it would look like to combine them, and then I found it already combined. But so the bottom model, sort of the bell curve, is demonstrating this idea of whenever we have some sort of a new innovative idea in science and education and technology, there's sort of this period of innovators, which is typically less than 3%. And then the early adopters, I think, goes up to about 13.5%. And then there's this sort of chasm of time and energy required to get into this area of a majority, early majority, late majority, and finally the laggards. And so in terms of UDL, most people seem to be concurring that holistically, not necessarily in higher ed, but holistically, we're in this stage of early adopters. So there are certain districts and schools and educators around the world who are bought in and who are doing this. We're past the innovator stage in the sense that we have resources, we have materials, we have community being built here. So it is definitely, at least to the early adopters phase, but to really get over to that next stage of majority, that's really where the culture change more holistically occurs. And from her perspective, there were 3 ways that we get there through these use of mavens, connectors, and salespeople. And that's another model, but basically the idea is that mavens are these knowledgeable, the ones who know a lot and want to share their knowledge. Get the connectors are people who bring people together, like what William and Darla and others were talking about, that idea of needing community, needing to know how to be connected with other people. The connectors are the ones facilitating that. And the salespeople are those who are really pitching it to people who are not yet part of the community, trying to get them in, trying to get them to buy in and to do something with it. And all 3 of them are important, but have different functions as we move from early adopters to early majority, where Katie was basically saying, identify which of these you are, and then do more of that. Like, we really need to redouble our efforts to get over that chasm. Jody, do you want to follow on that?
Yeah, sure. Exactly. And that, as Eric and I were kind of debriefing last week, too, we're all mavens. We all have maven qualities. We all have connector qualities. We all have salespeople qualities. And we might need those in different areas to help jump the chasm at our own schools. And so we were thinking about that as kind of a way to think about some of our shared work together, is how to build and support each other in those areas, depending on the work that we're doing and the goals that we have on our campuses or at our schools. And perhaps using that as ways to think about our roles as UDL navigators and leaders in our schools and in our communities. Yes, we're proposing that we could use the second half of our time together to, and if that lens feels comfortable, the Maven connector salespeople language, if that works for you, feel free to use it. If you're thinking about it in a different way, share that with us too. But how we can help further our work, help each other further our work at our own schools and together with those interdisciplinary, interorganizational opportunities as well. Yeah, in general, it could be during the SIG time or at the summit for next year. So those were kind of the 3 tiers that we were thinking of as we're building our Maven connector salespeople skills to help us all get over the chasm and help others get over the chasm. Ways that we could do that in those kind of three buckets. I'm just looking.
It's also worth noting the reason that I included that second model and the overlay, you know, as we were thinking through that, one of the things that came out a few times at the summit for the first time for me was more of a disillusioned tone, you know, and from people that previously were clear and loud evangelists for UDL, people like Brian Dean. I found myself in that as at various times. You know, there was this sense of like, I'm not even sure this is what I want to be doing with my life. I'm not sure I believe in UDL anymore. This sort of disillusionment that was appearing at times, and it was really important to me to hear that and to hear from other people who have invested in UDL. But it, you know, and it was difficult to wrestle with that by myself and to feel like, am I a fraud for taking, you know, taking initiatives and being, you know, trying to be a leader in UDL when I'm feeling this way. And it was helpful to see this model and see this is actually completely expected. You know, it's part of these kinds of innovative, culture changing sort of things that there's a lot of excitement out front as we think about the possibilities. And we get to this point of the grind of like, now how do we make it work? How are we going to bring this into a system in which it is controversial, in which it is antithesis to the way things are? And that the slowness with which things move, especially in the context of higher ed, can and often does lead to this sense of disillusionment. So I want to encourage you, as I was encouraged, that's to be expected. Like you're not a hypocrite if you feel like this is hard sometimes and I'm not sure that I can follow through with it. I think that's actually very common in our community, and it's okay to say that. But it also helps me to see that there is a next step to that, you know, that when we start getting wheels turning, we will get to those points of enlightenment, of change, and ultimately we're going for that plateau of productivity in which we really see systems changing in our contexts. Other thoughts on that before we get into the more practical aspects or other takeaways from the summit that you'd like to touch on?
I just think, hi. So I just think one of the things, again, that's different about higher ed than, let's say, K to 12, is I found at the summit you'd have a lot of districts who have adopted UDL. And so there was a lot of support behind it and a massive community within a district of people doing it. And I think when we talk about that kind of trough of disillusionment, I do think it impacts us differently in that we don't have kind of that person beside us saying, oh, of course, absolutely, or here's the difference that this, you know, professor is seeing in a classroom, or even when we're talking or watching our students develop, you know, we might have a faculty member who never teaches that student again. What difference, like, did they see a difference? Is that something that they want to continue with and pursue if they haven't seen any results for it? Like, I think there's so much about UDL implementation that's just different in higher ed. And so, yeah, certainly the chart at the top makes me feel better. That trough of disillusionment, I even love what it's called. Anyway, and that's just, I find, just a difference within higher ed. There's not a whole whack of people doing it. There's not a whole team of folks who are encouraging you and you know, keeping on. So just different for us.
So this is Allison, just to kind of, because I am in K-12 a lot, they feel the same way. I think it is really hard to get an entire system involved and invested. It takes years. So there are a few models, but very few, and they're 7 to 10 plus years into the process. So I think that's really important, and also really hard that it can take a long time. I'd like to highlight one group that's not here in this conversation, but is doing some really fabulous UDL work, and it's Goodwin College in Connecticut. And they have started really explicitly trying to build teams. So I don't know how and what that might look like in your context. And I'm going to try to get them to come for the next conversation. And they are more than happy to chat, you know, outside of just, you know, these conversations. But they are on their second cohort right now. They built their first cohort last fall of about 20 educators, so they'll be up to about 40. And the results, I'll put a link to a blog, their UDL blog. What they're doing is so exciting. And I know every institute of higher ed is very different. They are a teacher's college, so I know that they're not a teacher's college, I'm sorry. I'm forgetting the name of it. Their community is very, it's a workers' college. People are working and I'll look it up, so I'm sorry I don't have the language quite right. I'll put them up as just a model to keep thinking about, you know, how can we build out these teams and how can we not feel like we're isolated little islands.
So this is William, if I can jump in. I've got a bunch of stuff swirling around in my head after hearing several of you talk about things. So I think first, maybe going back to some earlier comments and a bit of what Darla was talking about. You probably are all aware that there is a lot of stuff going on at Syracuse University following the Theta Tau videos that circulated from our engineering fraternity that were extremely racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, and you name it. They were just awful. And there's been quite a response from students, from staff, faculty, and administration. There's been a whole series of fora in like all of the colleges where faculty, staff, and students have got together to kind of process these things. And on Monday of this week, we had two events in the disability community. One was sort of a disability caucus, where as people with disability, who identify with disability, talking about that particular, those videos, but other systemic challenges on the campus. And then also a disability justice piece that was sort of the second part of that, where we had more faculty and staff come, allies, and the chancellor of the university came and listened. So why am I saying all this? So this has sparked a lot of conversations, and as in my role as the ADA coordinator and on this team of folks that work to protect rights and advocate for folks across different marginalized identities who feel they've been discriminated against, we're hearing a lot of complaints just by students, for example, of really of sometimes racist, very ableist, or other types of discriminatory microaggressions and other more macro conduct by faculty in the classroom. And so I propose to our group this, we call ourselves EORs, you know, like Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore, because our acronym is EOIRS, and it's a whole mouthful to say. But I think there's an opportunity here for faculty training on UDL, because from my perspective, UDL provides an opportunity to really get the student voice into the conversation and to get diverse student voices, because we're looking to engage students on where they're coming from. That's part of what UDL means to me. And by using UDL, by training more faculty to use the UDL, I think we can open up these class discussions to broaden the perspectives. It's one approach to that issue. All right. Yeah, so I said I had a bunch of stuff swirling around in my head. That's a part of it, and there's more. But I've just said a mouthful, and I'm going to stop before you all fall asleep.
That really resonates with me too, William. at our campus. I learned this week that we're hosting a series of workshops about human rights, targeting one or two of the schools to help faculty learn more about a lot of those topics that you just listed. And they've requested a UDL workshop, kind of 1 to 2 hours, right? To just pull all that together. And so I'm on it's called the Learning Design and Support team. And we've been asked to facilitate that and co-facilitate with other faculty. And I'm really interested to learn more if there's things that are coming out that you guys are working on in terms of the faculty development pieces that weave some of those other areas into the UDL faculty development offerings really intentionally. By the time we see the faculty, they'll have had about 5 weeks of different sessions targeting. So there's a lawyer is coming in. I think there's some folks from the LGBTQ community, the disability community. So there's some different voices that will be there. And then part of the goal of us is to weave this together in terms of learning design and problem solving. So if anyone has resources or ideas or things that have really worked or haven't worked, I'm be very curious, especially within that short time frame, that 1 to 2 hour, how to make that switch and that engagement part for folks when they're probably going to want very practical, just tell me what to do strategies. And we want to create an experience that helps them see lots of strategies really differently, not just in that 1 to 2 hour time frame. So if anyone has ideas, I'm very open to that, here or offline.
If I can, this is Lillian, again, from Appalachian State. And a couple of things both William and Jody brought up that I'm really interested in and very much resonate. As a college in the South, this past fall after Charlottesville, having a very heightened awareness of racial tensions on a campus was very important. I teach freshmen. And so I had a course that completely moved away from our international focus to public art and Confederate monuments. And that, and I'll be talking a little bit about that for the CAST Summit, luckily, later on. But it was, for me, a very UDL thing because it was about creating a class that was safe. And when I think about safe spaces, it's not a place where you can go shut yourself away and color and process. A safe space is a place where everybody is safe and heard and valued. And then we can push a discussion or we can have it. The final project for that course ended up being a 2-hour exam during the exam time where we met with the chancellor, the provost, the vice chancellor, and the head of all the student governments of every North Carolina university. I didn't sleep that semester at all, but I also had the most diverse group of students. Traditionally, our campus is very white and very upper middle class. And I had students from Liberia, West Africa, from Congo, Sierra Leone, and also African-American students and students from Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York in my class of 22. So it was a wide, crazy variety. And I think it was UDL and the methodologies, the space of the room. I would sit on the floor while they sat in desks because of the power imbalance. There were so many things that I didn't even know what to call that influenced the track of that course. We had dinner. They came to my house for dinner. They made the whole website for all of this. To talk to the chancellor. They ran the whole thing. So that's why it was very empowering, but it was so important for the students, these students coming in. And I learned so much, especially the students who were actually African felt very little connection to their African-American colleagues. Just like, what's the big deal? This is very different. But the university where I am has started something called Inclusive Excellence, which you've probably heard of. And that, I think, is very similar to intercultural competency, because you're recognizing that race, ethnicity, that marginalized groups, the queer, we talked about words, all of this culture, are cultures too. So things like being able to reach all your students includes thinking about cultures that rely on storytelling a lot more than they might rely on reading. I know my family culture is reading. We read a lot. But if you think about many, many other family cultures or area, rural versus urban, that is a very different type of how to get information across, those sorts of things. So, and so storytelling might be a far better way to reach some students than read this article type of thing. And so providing lots of course, options, that sort of thing. But we just had an inclusive excellence training. And Jody, to your question, I'm working with some of our faculty developers to do for our first year seminar, how to handle difficult dialogues. What happens when some student or somebody else makes a remark that you see other eyes pop in the room. And this is through a difficult dialogues initiative. So there's an actual group called Difficult Dialogues. But there's also, here's all my information, Sustained Dialogue Institute. Yeah, so I can send this to everybody. Faculty Inclusive Excellence Institute. And that had very practical things, but we did it in 4 hours, and that was not enough time. So I can't say there's anything for 1 hour or 2 hours. But what I'm working on this week with another faculty member is we're going to have a first year seminar intensive retreat. And we have a common reading that many universities have, it's high impact practice. And our common reading this year is the Laramie Project, which is about the murder of Matthew Shepard because of his sexual orientation. And all first year seminar, whether it's about physics, math, geology, they all have to include this book. So you can imagine our faculty is wondering, how do you, if I've never talked about race or queer theory or anything in the classroom, what am I supposed to do with the Matthew Shepard murder? And his mother is actually going to speak on the 20th anniversary of his death at the university. So, I mean, I can just imagine everybody's going to be on pins and needles. But there are some things about what can you do when something like that happens. The 4 C's is one of them, asking clarifying questions. What was the intent of that remark? But there's, I know from thinking about what you guys were starting talking about when I came in, different indigenous pedagogies, other ways to be coming about it. I think there's even more. How to put it in 1 hour, I think that's impossible, but at least I can send you guys this Sustained Dialogue, really good beginning, and that looks at inclusivity, and the idea of inclusive excellence is if you're not inclusive of everybody, it's not excellent. So it has to be both inclusive and excellent. Anyway, it's so you guys have, William and Jody have tapped into what is really happening, at least in North Carolina and on our campus. And I do think that it is a link with UDL and approaching discussions, dialogues, classroom, how you set up your classroom. And but I'm learning too. For example, I tell everyone, you can call me Lillian. I have my freshmen calling me Lillian because I don't want there to be a false barrier. Well, it turns out some students come from a background where that makes them really uncomfortable, and they want to say Miss Lillian, you know, or Professor, and that's really, really hard. In fact, so I thought I was being great. Hey, it's fantastic. You call Lillian, and then I've made them really, really uncomfortable. They don't want to talk to me because they don't want to say my name. So I don't have it right, but at least I've just found these resources I'd be happy to add to the chat. So.
Thank you.
And just a short point from that, Lillian, I think the beauty of UDL that really did come out in the IRN this year is UDL, you don't do UDL for UDL's sake. It's always UDL for something. And so UDL for the integration of all learners, or, you know, so it's beyond, and it can be UDL for accessibility. But I love that we are getting to these greater levels of social justice, which is where UDL was initially founded. So, you know, it's kind of gone from, and I don't even like using the word margins because we know that the bell curve is contextual, but it's from the margins, and it really is about social justice. So in a lot of ways, we're sort of coming full circle.
So let's pull this together a little bit. So what I'm hearing is reflecting on several points. I think being in isolation, like several of you have pointed out, we must be the mavens, connectors, and salespeople in our context. But what I've been hearing from you guys is, especially William and Darla and Lillian, is a focus on the salespeople aspect, in the sense that this is answering the question of why we're doing UDL. And it's going beyond the original conception of UDL as being for students with disabilities into being for a much wider range of diversity, talking about racial, ethnic, cultural, social factors. And I'm not sure that we have enough Maven-oriented data to support that, you know, and to get administrators and faculty to buy in, that who know this is the problem, but they don't know that UDL is the answer to that problem. I think we need to be collecting information that supports that. So what I'm putting in the notes here in terms of what we need in general is this expansion of the message of UDL to racial, social, ethnic, etc. inclusion, opportunities to get diverse student voices into part of that conversation. We're seeing both with Lillian, you know, learning from the students. I had this great idea, but I needed to hear from them to see how my idea could be made better. You know, and from William specifically calling out the necessity of not having us adult faculty dictate what our students need, but allowing them to be representative of themselves. What does that look like in the context of higher ed? Opportunity to see how UDL might address diverse issues of discrimination specifically. And I think that's good language to use with administrators, and saying, instead of all this section, Section 8, you know, sort of retroactive dealing with problems after they've happened, how can we facilitate a culture of inclusion to begin with? I think that's something that administrators might respond to, but again, we need evidence to support that. So can we be collecting qualitative data, not necessarily quantitative, but like the stories, and hearing from the students and start publishing that? So that's what I'm hearing from you guys in general. Let's make this more practical. What can we as a SIG do to facilitate that development?
Yeah, I'd like to just jump back in, William, again. I think one of the challenges we face is potentially sort of a challenge of legitimacy based upon, here we are, a bunch of well-intended, intelligent, caring adults, but we're all white. And so I have some great colleagues at Syracuse University in the African American and the Latinx communities that are doing some marvelous work around cultural competence, around sort of similar to what Lillian was talking about. We have interfaith dialogue circles in Syracuse University, both functioning at Syracuse University with the Syracuse community, which happens to have one of the most impoverished African American inner city communities in the United States. And with the community college, we have these dialogue circles going on that are engaging faculty, staff, and students. So anyhow, what am I saying? What I'm saying is that we need to diversify ourselves. If we have good colleagues we're working with who are doing work that is similar to what we're talking about here, although I don't think of myself as the salesperson naturally, it's something that I respond and push back from any sense of being a salesperson. But I think I feel this obligation to better engage my colleagues who work on these issues into this discussion, because for that facial, I don't mean that in this, I mean the facial the facial sense of legitimacy. We need to be a more diverse community ourselves. And anyhow, that's not well articulated, but that's what I'm thinking.
I love that idea, William. I think that's really important to be intentional about. And I wonder if that's another potential theme for, like, you know, bring a friend, bring your kid to work day. We could bring a friend to the SIG day and bring a non-UDLer or a new UDLer or a colleague from a totally different area of the college or university and bring them in to share their work, or if there's intersections. That might be really a cool theme for one of our SIGs too, and maybe help each other be the connectors and salespeople too. I'm just cognizant of the time, and that 10 o'clock creeps up quickly. And so before we wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for their contributions today, and that these conversations are intended to really be sparks, and that we really hope that everyone follows up with each other offline as well. And the listserv idea will help with that and build that offline to dig deeper into some of these conversations. Like, I definitely will be in touch with folks over the next couple of weeks about some of the faculty development things, just to riff some ideas off of, for sure. And so I hope others do that as well, that these are great synchronous moments, but really just sparks that we can continue in other areas that we need to pursue at that time. Eric, is there anything else you want to say before we offer a closing comment to the group?
So just following on what you just said, I added a column in the check-in table, so you can put your email or Twitter contacts so that you can begin reaching out to one another to follow up on these discussions. And we will be sending some asynchronous opportunities following this. We like to do this, you know, conversation starters, that kind of thing, to continue the conversation asynchronously, because as Jody was saying, an hour is too short for the kind of things that we're biting off here. And that's the intent of this. But so be watching for that. And I think that's all.
Awesome. And a little plug for the hashtag UDLHE Higher Ed hashtag if we're chatting on Twitter. And with 1 minute left to go, if anyone has any burning things or just wants to say a quick goodbye, I'll get off the mic and wish you all a very good rest of your week. Thank you for being here.
Take care.
Thank you. Great to hear you all.
Bye-bye.